Good evening, everybody, and happy Valentine's Day. It's Monday, it's Neural at night, and Valentine's Day. Hope you had a decent holiday weekend with Valentine's Day and did something special, or when you're done here, do something special, have a good meal, or just go out and relax and have a drink or something like that. So tonight, it was what we were asked last week if we would talk about how we talk to our patients, how we go over a map and interpret maps with patients and clients. And so it was a popular enough topic that we're going to try and record this. We'll see how the recording comes out. So, try to keep your background noise down or we will mute you. And anybody can chime into this. Richard and Judy and I will start off with, just kind of sharing a little bit of information. And maybe it might be smart just to have, so Richard just go over how they design the whole mapping system and why you have all these things. And then we're all going to take turns just sharing, how we talk to clients. So for those of you that are interested in this topic, it's going to be very helpful to ask questions and not just wait and hope that somebody will turn around and hit the topic you you want us to talk about. So hopefully that'll happen. So are we unmuted yet, Richard?
Yeah, I think we got
All right.
everybody unmuted.
But I definitely want to emphasize that if you want this conversation to meet your needs, it'd be great to talk a little bit about what those needs are, because this is
Yes.
a huge topic. So,
Yes.
and it can go lots of different ways. So join in.
And I have a map I can put up at any point in time, just in terms of, again, for us to
good.
work with as a working model. So
That's
I've
great.
got one. Yeah, I've got one, that we can just pop up. Pretty
Good.
typical looking map. So,
Excellent. I'll just turn the screen that over to you, Rob.
okay. All righty.
We can all focus on the same page.
Yep. Okay. And here is the map. I'm
All
going
right.
to blow it up a little bit here, and I'm going to start at the top, of course. So again, just to, I'm gonna, and Richard chime in, Judy chime in. I'm just gonna go over the map, just each page and what it is. I'm not going to talk about interpretation. Just going to look, what does a map include? So the NewMind mapping system gives us sort of summary report about the whole report. And then you have what we call the dashboard. Now, for those of you that are familiar with this mapping system, we also have what's known as the client report, and that's this report right here, which is like a mini version, if you will. It's a mini version of the dashboard in very simplistic terms. So instead of calling it under arousal, we look at maybe cognitive efficiency and mood, focus. And then for the inhibited, you've got mood. So instead of calling somebody depressed, it's mood. And then for the over arousal or anxiety, we have relaxation. So, you can talk about, this tells us, whether your relaxation is good or not so good, whether your mood is good or not so good. And it has the same CEC, indicators that the patient fills out for these, but it doesn't go into the detail that you would have with the actual dashboard. So that's the client report, and that's the easiest thing. And I think most clients would understand this without having to go into a tremendous amount of detail. And all this is saying here, the head map is saying, of all the sites, which ones have the most abnormalities? And of course, those tend to match up, as you would all know, with your protocols that come out in the clinical map. So the dashboard in the clinical map has the same thing, what we call under arousal, inhibited, and over arousal, and you've got the same CEC categories and the EEG findings. And then it gives you more detail, executive processing, the memory processing, math comprehension, verbal processing, visual processing, reading comprehension. we have the theta beta ratio. And again, just as a reminder, this is really there because a lot of people have requested it because it was the initial sort of LUBAR way of looking at attention deficit. So I just tell patients it's a single measure, not the only or the best measure necessarily. And then you have your midline analysis. And to be honest with all of you, we have talked back and forth about whether we're going to keep it or not. But right now it's there, and it just shows you along the midline at these 4 sites centrally whether your power is high or low compared to a normative database of people within your age group.
Now,
Then
one
you
second.
have oh
Okay.
yeah.
Here's what I want to, after you describe this, I think what would be really helpful would be to go back and talk a little bit about how you talk with people about what you just
Yeah, exactly. I'm just going over what the parts of the map are,
Okay.
and then we're going to go to the very top again, and I'm going to let you start out. I'm just
Oh,
kind of reviewing it all, and let you and Richard chime in
yeah.
here. So then you have your subcomponent analysis. It just tells you whether each particular band that you see here, the delta, the theta, low alpha, low beta, beta, high beta, or high or low, or okay. Then you have your head maps, and the top piece is the power, the magnitude, if you will. Then you have your dominant frequency, and with the new mapping system, we have the slider bars, which a lot of us like because it's easier to show this to a client and say, you know, you're a little bit on the slow side. Typically, maybe you don't sleep well, or if you have some fast beta, that's typically associated with, you know, anxiety or what have you. The interconnectivity slider bars, the asymmetry slider bars, and then you get the head map again, and it's got the sites, and it covers the same territory in the top piece, but it just has the head maps, so you can look at those versus the slider bars. And then you get the same thing with the eyes open. You have the overall topography maps, your dominant frequency, interconnectivity, your asymmetry, a repeat of the head maps with the head maps and the sites. And then you get down here to the protocols, and keeping in mind again that you saw on the client report that the worst sites were FP1, FP2, O1, O2, and oftentimes your protocols will come up with very similar sites. And then, of course, based on the map, it gives you a protocol number based on the NewMind protocols and how they're used with the map. It also gives you the primary and secondary z-score sites, which I find terribly helpful because sometimes I want to know, you know, what other areas might be secondary problem areas that I want to go work with because I have certain preferences. Same thing with the eyes closed protocols, the 2 protocols that come up from the worst sites, and then your z-scores. Then you come down and you have the supplements that are recommended based on the map, and it summarizes your patient's overall physiology report. And then this newer edition, this came out within the past year or 2, is functional deviance by location. So it really sort of summarizes the map and the key areas of the map and what some of the indicators are from the standpoint of looking at it from a, if you will, a diagnostic or a symptom standpoint. And then you have the explanations for all of the things that you see in the dashboard, you know, inhibited, over-arousal, under-arousal, executive processing. So these are just giving you some detailed sort of ways of understanding what's in the map and the various components with some good explanations. So that's your basic map. Okay, that's all the components of the clinical map, which is what we're looking at here, and the client map, which is the previous one. Judy and Richard, tell me where you want to go.
Let's go back to the top.
All right, the top it is.
I think in a way I would go a little pre-map discussion because before I go through the map, I want to go through the physiology and the CEC, a little bit of that first, because I think that's a very good lead-in for people. You know, as I say here pretty regularly, I'm not the most technical speaker when I talk to the clients, but you know, I polled my team today because I have a few people that we work together, my techs and all, and we all seem to agree that people are very satisfied with the conversations I have with them. So I thought, do I need to be more technical? And basically, when I first go into the physiology, I think that's really important. And can we talk about that first, or should we stop here? Because we might get sidetracked. I want to make sure this stays as useful for people.
Well, I think we should talk about it because that's like you say, it's a important component of reading a map is looking at that stuff.
Right.
So the
Well,
first
there's
thing when
an
I
example
go
here.
into the physiology, okay, I explain it. I say, you answered these things, and so you picked categories or symptoms or feelings that sometimes you said or all the time. And the way I conceptualize this, which I'm hoping is right, I say, and these all are indicative of a scoring. Okay, so if you notice in here, when you start looking at it, you may see, let's see, do we have a couple that are repeaters? Because they're often repeaters, and I try to explain that. Heart racing and another, well, this one doesn't have
Well,
repeaters.
this has nausea.
Yeah, nausea a couple of times. So I
Yeah.
said that what this is looking for is the different body systems that this complaint or feeling state that you have might relate to. And it gives it a score, and then it lists things with the score. So I'm interested in many things here, I tell them. I'm interested in what your total score is. And this score of 64 is kind of okay. I'm not sure how old the person is, but I say generally, I'm okay with a score between 40 and 50. Now, usually I'm looking at a score that's 125. I'm never hardly looking at scores that are 64. So what that says to me is there's some imbalance going on in your body, your gut brain, and we're going to explore that further. So
Yeah.
right away, I'm setting up the conversation for a bigger conversation than what we're going to do neurofeedback wise. Go
Yeah,
ahead,
this
Rabbi.
guy, just so you know, Judy, he's around in his mid to late 30s. A pretty physically fit kind of guy. He was in the military. He came because he had a brain injury. But as you were saying, this could be it could be a child, it could be a 90-year-old. The scores will vary. We've seen kids with very high scores or very low scores, and the same thing across the whole age spectrum.
And honestly, I get them sometimes where it says thyroid hyper and thyroid hypo. And in all frankness, I do not consider myself very good at explaining that to people. So what I say is, I get this information. I'm not going to tell you that I'm the expert in interpreting it, but it's telling me that we need to find out more. And so I don't take responsibility for saying that. And maybe tonight somebody can give me an easy way to explain how you can show hypo and hyperthyroid in the same assessment and what to do with that for people. So I have found like a way around it so I don't get trapped. But that would be, I would, if anybody has how they handle it when you see both.
I just simply say these are showing up. This is based on your self-report. And if you have if you have concerns, I just say print a copy of this. I'll print a copy for you and take it to your doctor. And the doctor says, what is this? I just simply tell them that this is your self-report. It's a questionnaire that you were given by a clinician. This questionnaire has been reviewed by a lot of medical doctors with approval, and it's just to say to your physician, these are symptoms I have. Do you think we need to do anything with it? Testing, blood work, whatever. That's what I do. I'll just leave it there.
And I try to expand it out a little bit outside. And I say, when uh, in the beginning, I thought I was just going to look at maps and I was just going to do neurofeedback and that was going to be that. But I now know so much more, and that we have to figure out some of this physiology stuff, because if we can correct that, we'll have an easier time with you working with your brain. And so I think that many times you go to the doctor and they think inside of a box, and we want to think outside the box. And so so I actually enlarge the context right away, because I'm going to want them to talk with somebody who might be able to give them different input perhaps than their medical doctor can. So, because very often, for example, when I see thyroid, I say, and if you tested your blood through your medical doctor, you may well find the couple of thyroid tests are within normal limits. But I'm going to give you this paper, which I believe Carl passed out one time and I printed. And there are, it may not, I'm sorry, Carl, if it was not you, but there are like 10 tests on there that really look at thyroid function. And so I start right away talking to them about enlarging the scope of the conversation. So anybody have input there that they want to add to this?
Hi,
Well,
it's Cassandra. Oh, sorry. Is that Richard?
Go ahead, Cassandra, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think I cover the same types of things that both Judy and Rob were saying. The other piece that I talk about, and this is just, I think, to be really clear with about what the limitations of what my scope of practice is, and I'm really clear with them that these are indicators to me that because I'm not an expert, I'm not a medical doctor, or that's what I let them know, that I'm not that these are things to be followed up with their medical doctor, their naturopath, somebody else that have come up, and this is an important part of what we're doing, but it's not my area of expertise, and I just feel better about that, letting them know kind of what the limitations of my practice are.
I totally agree with you on
Yes.
that.
That's a good
Absolutely.
thing to do, for sure.
I would want to emphasize before going into this that these are things that may impact and get in the way of the neurofeedback training working as optimally as it might, which is why we even bother focusing on this.
Right, that's exactly it. That's
So
the whole point.
So that I tell them, so they're not wasting their time, their money, and my time.
Excellent. I think that's a great answer. That's
In
true. I
my
mean,
experience, excuse me. I was just going to say that people really appreciate this conversation. They don't mind hearing that this is outside my scope of practice, like you're saying, Cassandra, but they appreciate that we're thinking about this, that we're thinking about them as a whole and not just a brain that's coming.
I completely agree. And that's been my experience, that they really appreciate more of a holistic view. And you know, I just had an experience of myself last week of going to my own medical doctor who didn't take more of a holistic view, and I felt what it was like on the other side of that, to have somebody not really see the whole picture, or even to ask about the whole picture. And so I know when I've presented this to my clients, they've felt, I think, more seen and heard, that I'm looking really at all the possible reasons and contributing factors to what's going on for them. So I agree.
I think Michael really hit the nail on the head, though, in terms of why we put it in here. And that is because these are potential confounds to neurofeedback, and we want to identify them. And we're not saying this is not a diagnosis, but we're saying you have a lot of symptoms in these areas. We know what it does to the brain map. You know, we know what a lot of these things, how they alter the brain map, and we want to know, is there stuff that's going to interfere that's physiological? And this is a suggestion of what might be happening, and you might want to double check on this, you know, because it could get in the way of what we're doing. And that's all.
You know, when we were talking about this, my clients do like having when they fill it out, all that information to take to their doctor. and to even look at it, because sometimes they even go back and re-look at it because they remember more things. But the big thing is they really appreciate that I'm not trying to be the end all and do all, like they feel like some practices are, that I'm limiting my scope of practice. They like that.
I also begin the conversation about the gut-brain connection. And I say more and more and more, this is something those of us that think outside the box have known for some time. But more and more and more, the medical model is also picking up on this. They're doing research on, and they're fine, and I don't quote it verbatim, but I talk about the research they're doing on mice and describe the vagus nerve and how it feathers all the way down into the gut. And on the research on mice say when they cut the return of the vagus nerve, the mice get anxious and depressed. So more and more and more evidence is piling up to say that the gut-brain connection is very, very important. And a number of the things, then most of them have there is related. And so we need to examine this further. I don't know as much, but we need for you to find out, and we'll talk together about how you might do that. So I also bring that in.
Hey, Judy.
Mm-hmm.
This is Carl.
Hi, Carl.
I couldn't unmute myself in the car, but now I can. But I wanted to answer your question or your concern about that hypo hyperthyroid, if that's okay.
Oh, I'd love that. Thank you.
So, well, number one, there's symptoms that people can have, and just like you said, they're categorized into different areas. And it doesn't necessarily mean the person is hyperactive at the same time, although you can have that with Hashimoto's, you can have both symptoms. So they're just categorizing them as to the most common ones that are hyperactive symptoms and hypoactive symptoms. So that's, you can have hyperadrenal and underactive adrenal symptoms at the same time as well.
Yeah.
So they're just listing them out. And then, like you guys are saying, you have to send someone to someone that can evaluate that and kind of suss out what's actually going on with that person. Because those things can impair, all the things that you're mentioning, confounds to, neurofeedback success and the gut-brain connection, etc. And that was the chart that I did post one time when we were talking about thyroid. Yes.
I grabbed it. That was like 3 years ago, I think.
I think that was, and I remember I was on the front porch of my at my house. I think it was a Friday. So.
And I put my logo on it.
No problem. It's just from one of my thyroid PowerPoints. The seminars that I would do back in the day. So.
I also asked when the last time they had a metabolic panel was, especially if they have symptoms of tiredness, and I also, anytime anybody's played football, had a concussion, any kind of head injury, any kind of car accidents, or depending on how much tension they have in their head when we're trying to do neurofeedback, I ask if they've ever seen a chiropractor or an osteopath, because if your spine is out of line, that can cause a lot of problems, cause a lot of sleep deprivation, cause headaches, cause things. And, it can be very important and pivotal. So.
I agree. I actually, go over all the things you've all discussed, but I'll also say to them, and some of this may show up in the map. So if I'll pay attention, I'll say you indicated blood sugar, and that may show up in the map. And then I point that out to them. Or if they come up with a lot of adrenal stuff, I said, you may have adrenal fatigue, and that may show up in the map. And so I try to correlate a little bit of how the physiology could show up in the map from the standpoint of their brain function, understand there is a body-mind connection. And, of course, then I encourage them to go take this to the doctor.
You can be really minimalist about it too. You can just say, look, This is just looking at your symptoms and how they may be related to different, you know, functional areas in your body. And what we're doing is we're scoring you, because if your score is really high, that's going to interfere with the neurofeedback.
Right.
And so because we have this, we can tell if you have so many symptoms, we can tell if it's going to interfere with the neurofeedback. And I say, so, you know, the average is about 78, the median's around 50 something, it's in the 50s. And if you're over 150, that's telling me you have physical symptoms which are going to reduce the efficacy of the neurofeedback, and they're going to affect the map. And I think you should, I just want to ask you, have you been seen for any of these things? And they might say, well, yes or no. And if they have a very high score, you know, where it's like 2 standard deviations, I'll say you might want to get that checked out. But if it's only 0 or 1 standard deviation, I wouldn't say that, you know, because that's not that far out into the tails. But if I see something that's 2 standard deviations or really close to it, and I see, you know, you might want to get that checked out because that might interfere with the neurofeedback. And if they help you with it and you have it, it could reduce a lot of your symptoms. So why not check it out? And
What number would you consider 1 standard deviation, for example?
It's
from
about,
the mean or
well,
from the norm?
the mean is around 78. You know, somewhere, you know, so it's roughly 150.
Okay.
It's
So
double that.
150, say, or under, you're okay with like that for people?
I wouldn't say I was okay. I would just say that it's going to minimally interfere.
Okay.
Over 150, it's going to interfere more.
I
You
mean,
know,
I have taken somebody who has a 350 or 360
yeah,
and told them I think they needed to take a look at what this is and try to
yeah,
let somebody help them with it, because
I
that's
would.
really going to interfere with neurofeedback. And I don't start until they do some work on that.
Yeah, that's kind of like Michael said. Well, I don't want to waste your time and my time and your money and my money. Let's, you know, you've got a high metabolic score. And usually when you say that, well, have you been checked for this and this? A lot of times they say, yes, I have. And yes, I did have that. Or, yeah, I should go and I haven't. I've been holding off. I mean, it's not unusual for them to say stuff like that. And you said a great thing, Judy. If you see gastrointestinal, you can say, well, if your gastrointestinal symptoms were, and a lot of those, we know for a fact that's going to affect your brain and your neurofeedback. Same thing with thyroid, those in particular. So we like to flag them and have you check them out just to be sure.
So
Great advice.
Go ahead, excuse me.
Oh, I'm sorry, Judy.
Go
It's
in.
Carl again. I just was curious on regards to the norm database. Is how is it segmented out as far as ages? And that's the first one, and the second one would be in regards to that Z-score. And I know I'm jumping ahead. Is the Z-score for magnitude, or which one of the neurometrics?
Well, right here, what we've done is we took a large sample from hundreds of clinics around the United States, around the world actually, but I confined it to the United States because I didn't want cultural variations interfering with the data. So I tried to keep it. I may have missed a few, but I tried to keep the samples so that they're mostly from the US and from all over the US. And then you run the descriptive statistics on the norm to see what the average score in the country was of people coming into neurofeedback clinics. And
Okay.
the average score was total score was 78. Now for kids, it's less. And I did one for adults and one for kids. I think I did kids up to puberty, just past middle childhood and into puberty. And then from puberty on, I just lumped them in with adults, more or less,
Okay.
as I recall. But, you know, the norm I'm talking about is an adult norm. And I have discussed the child, but I think it went kind of past everybody without them noticing, because it was pretty condensed discussion that day. But we have those norms for the kids too, and they're much lower. than the adults by a long shot.
You would expect in typical, yeah.
Yeah, and that's how we figured it. So it's not based on the map, it's just based upon how the clients responded to a frequency and severity and the score they got. And like I said, I usually don't bring much up unless they're scoring pretty high. And I'll say, well, that, your 2 standard deviations, or you're close to it. That's a high score, like the 17 here for hypothyroid. But I always look at the symptoms, and that's what the doc says: sexual indifference, hair thinning. Those tend to be fairly unique to thyroid. They aren't, no symptom is unique entirely here, but those are, and that's a pretty high score. And the liver's not that high, but I'd say, that's showing that something's going on, and the thyroid seems to be the main thing. So I'd say, well, you might just want to, when the next time they do your blood panel, just ask them to do mostly they do a TSH. But what they really need is T3, T4, but I don't know if a lot of the docs won't do that because they just aren't educated enough on the topic. Just want to look at the TSH. So I don't want to open
Not
up
only that, insurance companies have parameters that on the first screen, TSH is considered the only one, and if it's not out of range, then no other thyroid tests are medically indicated. Which that's why I do all those 10 thyroid tests on everyone, because you can have a normal TSH, because and a lot of other things they have normal, because the only reason they do it that way is because they're only using it to manage medication, right?
Right.
That's why that's why it became the standard. If it's only that, and only that's out of range, you TSH out of range, then you can order other tests. But so that's why people like me, we work with lab companies that give us negotiate with the labs to get the cash prices, so I can get those 10 thyroid tests for $88.50.
That's cheap. That's good.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Thank you.
That's
So
great. Thanks for your input, Carl.
This is the main thing I use before I go into map interpretation. I will use the ISI, but when I think about the relevancy, like the ISI is great for the conversation that I have to point them the difference between their score and the norm or the peak performer. But when it comes to relating to the conversation about the map, the physiology is the most important one. The CEC shows up when we begin the map conversation anyway. But I mean, I love the ISI, don't get me wrong, I always talk about it. But in terms of what we were here tonight talking about, how we talk about the map, the physiology guides me a lot.
Interesting. Well, you're an RN. That makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, I use I always go over the ISI first with everybody. I think it's partly the bias of how you're trained. I was trained as a psychologist, so I tend to go over the ISI, and I go over it in detail with them before I show them the map, and that has worked well.
I do too. I do too. I
Oh.
do that as absolutely blow by blow, everything. Like what we, yeah. But when I think about what relates to what I'm going to see on the map, yes, I think I'm going to see the anxiety and depression. And I may say, I'll show you this on the map because it's probably there. But the physiology will definitely be there and strengthen the holistic approach that I'm going to be advocating for. Like that's what I'm meaning.
I go over the ISI, the physiology, and the CEC before I go over the map. And in fact, I'm only going to go over a map until they've completed it. And there's one exception. One exception to that is somebody came in like on a Thursday and they were wanting to get this map done over the weekend because that's so they don't have to skip any work. I'll tell them I'll map them and I'll give them a preliminary, overview, but I will not interpret it until they completed all the other information, the ISI, the CEC, and all that. So I do all that as well because I review it again with the map, and then I try to tie again these into the map. So when I go over the map, I can refer back to the physiology and say, you see you have some high spots here in your delta and theta range of T3 and T4, and those oftentimes are indicators of blood sugar. And you've indicated you have some blood sugar issues, so that's that. And, or things like the really low, globally low alpha and adrenal fatigue, and so I try to tie each of those in. Of course, the CEC, like you said, Judy, is right there. So when you go over the map and the dashboard, you can't miss it.
I love the ISI. I love the pre-prep that it gives me as well for when I'm going to sit down with somebody, because you know about this person by looking at this.
You do, and I have read it out to people, and I've had people on occasion say, "Oh, I'm good with this. I don't need to see the map." They don't want to say. In fact, they said, like, well, "You've explained so much to me about what's going on with me. I'm done here. I go back to my counselor." And I'm like, "Oh, well, we're supposed to do neurofeedback, but okay."
Is everybody good with this, how they explain this? Is there anyone that wants a little more conversation about talking about this with people? This would be the time to kind of buzz in.
The only piece, it's Cassandra again, the only piece I'm wondering about is some information. I know we've talked about that this is normed for people, we don't use it in our clinic for people at 8 years and under. So some norm information would be good, and if there's a way to get the actual scores, like the numbers, instead of just guessing at where the bars are at, that would be helpful.
Oh, actual values in the bar. That's a good
Yeah,
point. I think at this point you could put a little number at the end of each bar so that you could see what the
that would
value was.
be really helpful
Yeah, it's
for
a
me to
great
know.
idea. I don't know why we didn't do it actually, but I guess it's
I thought
never
this
got
was
to it.
normed 16 and up.
No,
Am I
it's 18 and over.
18 and up? Okay.
18. Oh, right. And I guess I'm just thinking we just changed it. We used to do it. Yeah. Thank you for that, Judy. I couldn't
Rob uses
remember
it
how we
for
did it.
Rob uses it, and other people use it for younger people. But the reason it was normed for 18 and over, because I was trained in psychometrics, and that in the time when I was trained in graduate school, in the 20th century, you didn't use psychometrics on people under age 18 because it was considered invalid, that they were not capable of self-report effectively enough. And that was not just an opinion they had. That came from the work of Hans Eysenck and all these people who developed the whole field of psychometrics. And they tested out, at what age are people accurately reporting, what age, was there a difference in gender for accurate reporting? I mean, all that stuff was covered if you took a course in psychometrics. So you knew, that if you really wanted something that was accurate, you had to be over 18. The fact that Aaron Beck finally came out with a Beck inventory for kids was revolutionary, and the fact that somebody who was so high profile in the field of psychology and a past present APA, that he did that, was really a radical departure from tradition, and it was kind of a cool thing.
Yes, and like you said, Richard, I use it with younger kids. I have the parent fill it out, and I explain to them that there may be 2 or 3 questions that may not make a whole lot of sense, and I tell them why it won't make a whole lot of sense, that this isn't normed for people under the age of 18, but that I've done this with hundreds of kids, and it tends to give us some good information, and it tends to be pretty accurate. So I explain that to them so they
Well, I think
understand
that
that.
covers it. You've
Yeah,
explained what and
yep.
why. I mean, everything here is a tool, and its accuracy is, improved or degraded to some degree when it's applied appropriately. And you can you can have a bad map and say, well, a lot of this delta in the map is eye movement and stuff, and I know that, but the rest of the map is accurate. So we're going to discount this delta. We're not going to rule it out completely, but a lot of this is just artifact. And but the theta and the alpha are accurate, so we're going to look at that in the map, pay more attention to that. So I mean, just because it's the person's under 18, there are people at the age of 16 who can report better than full-grown adults on what they're feeling.
Yeah, that's true.
So it depends on you as a clinician. Do I think this person, can answer this well, and what do I want to get out of it? And am I using it responsibly, knowing that, I'm going outside the normal parameters, like Rob said, but I get valuable information from it that's applicable. So there's nothing wrong with that, as long as you own it, and you acknowledge it.
Hey, Richard.
Yes.
It's Honey. So yeah, I was thinking about the way I've kind of evolved in terms of going over maps, because I used to go over every single thing and every little dot. And I realized that it's hard for people to capture, like they're coming in overwhelmed either about themselves or about their child, and they leave sort of flooded. And I was thinking that because I've been taking a lot of classes now, and I've been noticing different presenters, like some people jam in. We have an 8-hour class and they have every slide is jam-packed with information. I pretty much remember nothing of what they've said. And other people who go slow and they just like highlight the points. So I know if I want to, I can even know that what they said a little bit, so I can go back and read notes. Like for other presenters, it's like I don't even remember what they were talking about. I knew it was about medical, but I don't remember anything else about it. So I was kind of trying to streamline when I present. I always get like a cover sheet at least if they don't fill out a full intake, because I took zebra and fishes type information and I created like a big packet from it, so I get like a really, even though they fill out all these forms online, I still have something in my hand. So I mean, it is a lot of work, but the very first page has goals or what you want to address. So I always just look and see what the problem is for that particular patient or for their child. And then when they sit down in front of me, if someone's coming in and they're talking about anxiety, so I say, hey, I'll look at an ISI a little bit, and then I'll show them where the over arousal is. And there's tears sometimes streaming down. Well, it's not all in my head. There's something that you could put your finger on. And I realize when I talk about delta and theta and alpha, like people never heard of these terms, or it's like way too much information. So I was also thinking about children's books. Like on every page, you have one line and a picture. You actually can remember it. It's just like, how can I distill this information to pinpoint what they're suffering with and to give them hope? And I think maybe I stole this from you, this metaphor of the three-legged stool. I always sit down and say, look, there's 3 parts to the story. And if you take away one of these legs, the stool, you can't sit on the stool. If we have a physiology, so what's going on in your body and in your cells, and are the neurons in your brain getting what they need? And then there's the emotional, what's happening in your house with your family, what's happening at work, what's happening at school. And then what's the third leg is what's going on in your brain map. And all of this needs to work together, because, people come in with ongoing stressors at home. We can give them neurofeedback from here until the cows come home. They're still gonna come back to you with, hey, what's going, so we can help maybe reduce the reactivity, but it's not like a panacea. Like people need to understand that, because you don't want to promise, and I agree, but otherwise you promise them a rose garden and you're not addressing. If someone has a methylation problem and their brain looks like it's sleeping, like if you don't look at that, or if someone has an iron problem, where you can do neurofeedback, their brains may not be able to respond. So my main focus is to see what it looks like in the map. If I'm thinking like, wow, there's a sleep deficit here, or maybe there's a methylation issue, and just say, look, we have to look at the physiological and let's take care of it. And I see that you're saying your anxiety is like 30, and look at the map, there's this imbalance in your asymmetry. I don't explain all that asymmetry. It's just too much for most people coming in, because they feel overwhelmed by what they're struggling with in the first place. So when I tie it to the symptoms, so I'll cherry pick which part of this whole collection of information that we have available to us, and I'll point out, and then they go, wow, there's something we can do, and people really feel like, because it's a sales pitch too, because you want to have people buy into that they could get this help, and you can show them like on paper that there's something here for them.
So well said, honey.
Yeah, excellent.
And in the dashboard, when verbal is sitting at 8, you kind of know they're not, or verbal and visual is so high in the dashboard, that really lets you know you have to watch the amount of words you use.
Right. And look at overarousal. An anxious person cannot take in this information. You know,
Yes.
they would need to take a course for them to get it.
I'm very similar to you. I pick and choose concepts I want them to. I try for concepts versus particulars, so that I think I can help them. You know, there's the old saying: if you if you fish for a man, he has a meal. If you teach him to fish, he has food for a lifetime, kind of thing. And I'm like, that's what I see myself as doing here. Let's talk about the concept. So here's and I do that a lot, so I really appreciate what you said. So, Rob, why don't you talk a little bit about this, since you have used this so efficiently and effectively over the years?
Well, what I also wanted to is ask Cassandra if she's going to be here a couple of more Monday nights, since she's the one that wanted this topic, and I know we're getting close. We're not going to get through a whole map tonight. So, Cassandra, I will check with you via email, and we'll post part 2 of this to go over
Okay,
more
well,
detail.
I'll let you know I'll be here.
Okay. But yeah, so again, in my observation, you know, here we have the ISI scores, and I will say to the, in this case, this was my patient, and I said, so you scored above an 18 on here, which would be clinically significant, and that matches the dial, which says, you know, you have some significant, you know, depression symptoms. And I'll say the same thing with the ISI 22. I'll say, so you also, you're matching what you told us about your anxiety. So I try to tie those in with the dials when I go over those. And from the physiology perspective, I don't think there's anything more I would add to what everybody else said about the physiology, other than I would point out in this guy's case, to tie it into the physiology, I would say, you see here, you indicated you had some you know, adrenal stuff. If he had happened to indicate that, and I would point out that this low alpha here supports what your symptoms. This is what it looks like when people are really stressed out and wind up just running themselves into the ground with adrenal fatigue. What we don't see here is the elevations, at least eyes closed, in the delta or theta range. So I don't worry about that. I keep focused on, you know, what these tell us about some of the things that they have told us. So I will tie this into memory. And of course, I would think that up here, we're going to see he has some memory problems. So I try to take the dashboard, and yeah, the map is agreeing with him, and he's indicating a ton of them, and the map is agreeing with a lot of it. So I try to tie the map in to these dials and the symptoms, so it makes sense. It's, oh, that's what that part of the map means. You know, he indicates anxiety, and you've heard us say a million times, this is a tremendous indicator of people who are stressed and have a lot of anxiety. The theta is low in the back. So that's sort of, you know, what I do with the ISI, the physiology, and the CEC is I talk about what they've self-reported and try to emphasize in the map itself when they've, you know, showed us here that he says, I've got some attention problems and I've got, you know, some categorization and, you know, executive processing. I'll try to point out that a lot of that would tie into the fact that your beta is dropping out. This is how you process information. So when your beta is low, it's like your battery's not charged. You know, it's you're just not processing information as efficiently as you could if you had, in this guy's case, better sleep, because I know he doesn't sleep well at all.
You know, something that I try to do on occasion is, in particular, if I have a lot to say about this and I want to get these like concepts across, sometimes I'll move it outside of them. And I'll say, if you were a 10-year-old boy who came because he couldn't sit still in class, he was really fidgety, you know, and I explain a little bit about the different waves from that perspective, but very simply. See, beta, that's the part of you that greets the world, what we all call that bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. Okay, so the beta with these 10-year-olds, and then I'll demonstrate, like they look you in the eyeballs, you're telling them, go upstairs, get your shoes on, get your book bag, brush your teeth, we got to get out of here in 10 minutes. So that wave So I use that example to explain how beta works. And then I go and I say, in these other waves, and I draw a box around delta, theta, and alpha, they're in charge of carrying that out. But if those waves are going too slow, the little boy's going to go in the room and everything is going to look the same appeal to him. And more than likely, he'll go to his favorite thing. And 15 minutes later, that's what he's doing, you know. And sometimes if if that shows, now let's go over here for a minute and I'll take him over to the eyes open if they've got that slowing. And I'll say, and so over here, you could see that there's sometimes that happens for you. But I brought it outside of them for a second so they could relax a minute and hear the story. And then I bring it back into them. So it's kind of like this mini mental break, because this is overwhelming to learn all this about yourself.
It is, and that's one of the reasons I wrote the book, A Consumer's Guide, because I give that to everybody.
Yeah, me too.
I come in, I do a free consult with them, and at the end of that consult, I say, and I know this is a lot of information to try to take in. I don't expect you to understand everything I've just said and be able to, put it to great use right away. I said, but most of the stuff I've covered with you today is in this booklet. So when they come back, they understand a bit about, alpha waves and beta waves and some of the functions. And you were talking about young kids. And one of the things I will point out to parents, when these two dials in verbal and visual processing are at 5 or higher, both of them, not just one, but both of them. In this case, this is an adult and they're not. But if this were, let's say both of these were 6 and this was a child, I would say, and I'm going to guess that your child has a hard time, doing routine tasks. I give the example of a school morning and they're supposed to, get up and do their hygiene and get dressed. And I said, and your kid doesn't probably get that. They probably get 1 or 2 of them. You have to constantly remind them, did you get your homework? Did you brush your teeth? Whatever. And it's like, they look at me and they go, how did you know that? And I say them because you've told me they have these symptoms and the map is pointing to the fact that they're agreeing with a lot of what you've said, and that's what we would expect. They're not capable. It's not that the kids necessarily oppositional. They're really more incapable of doing it. Their brains function as such that they need those constant reminders. Buy yourself a bunch of 3M stickies and put them in the bathroom, in the kitchen, at the front door, whatever. So,
Rob, I do that too, and I got it, all that information from you, but I always highlight how much it's not their kid's fault, because the expectation they have on their kid is so much above what their kid could possibly perform, and that's adding to all of their symptoms because of the stress of an expectation that's not realistic. So I want to get that burden off the kid immediately by saying, they can't do it. Look, it's right here. They simply can't do what you're asking right now. They're not doing it just to be defiant or to not want to follow through.
And it has nothing to do with that they're not smart enough to do it.
Right, exactly.
Smart has nothing to do with this. Their brain isn't letting them. And I immediately will tell the parents, so the language that you use, your sentences, you need to have a paragraph of 2 or 3 sentences at most. You are most likely over-explaining something. And it's not getting in.
And I also ask them to consider this for school, because they'll say, hey, the school wants them to do all these things. I said, not now, not yet. Let's give this child a chance to get into a place where they can. But that pile up is just going to, just magnify the problem. It's not helping your kid, and your kid's self-esteem is going to, pay a price tag for it. And it helps the parents advocate for their children better, because they are armed with information that it's not the kid's fault. And so they could, because schools do a lot of pushing on parents to have an expectation that's just not realistic.
Or get them on drugs.
Oh yeah, not every day. Every day I'm hearing this.
I really appreciate that we're not rushing through this mind map, everybody, and that we're going to be coming back. So just so you know.
Thank you.
Yeah. No,
Thank you.
it's an important topic. I think probably Richard will make the final decision. His team will listen to, but I think the session tonight was, clean enough with good general information to maybe post it up on the NewMind YouTube channel. We'll see about that. But I will look at the calendar again. I don't know if I can do that quickly here. Hang on just one moment. I can
I
tell
think
you.
next week we have a map already put for Monday.
Yeah, I think Bree has a map up for Monday as my best guess. And so in 2 weeks from tonight, since I know that works better for you, Cassandra, and this is your topic, does that work to come back in 2 weeks on it?
Yep, sure.
All right. All right. That'll go on our agenda when it gets mailed out again. So a good start.
Mm-hmm.
A good conversation. Thanks for all the people that contributed and shared ideas, and we will pick up with this in a couple of weeks because we barely got to the map.
A lot of great
Thank you all.
contributions, everybody,
Yeah.
Honey and Carl and Michael and everybody else who added in.
Absolutely.
Really
Takes a village, and I appreciate that a lot.
Yep. All right, folks. We will see you this coming Wednesday, and have a great rest of your evening and Valentine's Day. Give somebody you love a kiss, and we'll see you on Wednesday.
Happy Valentine's Day. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, everybody.